Alright guys, just going to do a quick video here helping somebody out explaining what an I-Pac is. I got a message sent to me asking me if I could go a little more in depth as to what an I-Pac is and how it interfaces, what it does, and a little more explanation as to what it is. So that's what I'm going to do. All it is a keyboard interface. It interfaces your keyboard in with your computer and your control panel to allow you pretty much to trick the computer into thinking that when you press one of these buttons, you're actually pressing the keyboard. That's all it really is a keyboard interface. Now you have two lines here. Let me get on this side. You have a connection here that's marked PC. You run this to your keyboard connection on your computer. And your keyboard plugs into here instead of the computer, so it literally interfaces. Then you run all your wires and cables to it. Now, the one slot, I should say one row is all player 1 and one row is all player 2. Now at the front of your connections is a ground. There's a ground at the very top of this row for player 1 and a ground at the very top of this row for player 2. Now you take that ground and you run that ground to every single button that you're going to use for player 2. There's a ground wire on here. It runs to this connection and then loops to this one and loops to that one, loops to that one, loops to that one, loops to this one, and then loops to every one of the joystick buttons and then loops to this one, and it creates the circuit for the grounds for all the other buttons. And I'll explain how the buttons work here in a second. I should say switches. I'll explain how switches work in a second. But your ground wire has to run to every single ground connection on all of your buttons for that particular side. Then of course you have all the rest of these are all your other buttons. You have let's see here, I don't know if I can read it. You have player 1, up, down, left, right, switch 1, switch 2, switch 3, switch 4, switch 5, switch 6, switch 7, switch 8, a player 1 start, a coin 1, and then you have like a 1A and a 1B. So you have all those, I believe it was 17. You have, I guess, a total of 34 buttons you can use and program with this I-Pac. That's pretty much all there is to it. You just run, like this switch right here, you'd run your ground to your, I believe it's the normally closed connection. Let me see here. Common. Your switch is going to say common. You have your switch here. You're going to use this top one and the one closest to it. This one up here is COM for common, and this one right here is NC for normally closed or normally open. I'm sorry, I lied to you. This is the common, this is normally open. This one and that one. So you put a ground wire in the ground connection of your I-Pac and run that to every single button for player 1 or player 2, whichever side you're going to be using. You run that ground to every single switch that you that's like this, that you run every single wire to this connection right here for all the switches. And then of course with the rest of them, if you want your player 1 left, of course you run that wire to like this connection here, and your ground is right there, and so on and so forth. That's pretty much all there is to it. Then you, this cable here is provided with the I-Pac, and like I say, that runs to your PS2 keyboard slot on your computer, and your actual keyboard plugs into the other side right there. And there's not much else to it. And for those of you who don't know too much about how switches operate, here's a little more in depth as to what they do. You got an actual switch here. It's called a microswitch. You have your common connection right there, your normally open connection closest to it, and furthest away from it is your normally closed. Now what I mean by normally open and normally closed is, here's your switch. When it's just sitting there dormant, not doing anything, it's normally open. What that means is here's your pathway for your current, or your pathway for your voltage. Normally open means that it's in an open state, the circuit is open. And by pressing this switch, you're taking that arm and closing it and allowing the circuit to travel. And normally closed means that when this is sitting here dormant, the pathway is always live. The circuit is always going. When you press this button, you're opening up the circuit. So the way these are designed is these are designed to be normally open. When you press the button, you're closing it. By pressing this button, you're taking this line and closing it and allowing the information to go through the line. That's how these switches are set up. And that means you need to use your common, which is this one here, and then the one closest to it is your normally open, which will be this one. If you were to take any of these wires and go from your common to your normally closed, none of them would work because the machine would think you're always pressing the buttons and never letting go. So it's a little more in depth as to what switches do, so you kind of get a better idea of how to wire these darn things up. And once again, I'm sorry that I'm not very good at explaining stuff, but that's the best of my ability. Anyway, so hopefully that helps out who it needs to help out, and anybody else out there who's interested in getting an I-Pac or how they work. J-Pacs are pretty much the same way, but I believe the J-Pac actually uses the JAMA harness, so yeah, there's no actual wiring that needs to be done. You would hook up your JAMA harness to the J-Pac, and I think that would be it. You interface your keyboard with the J-Pac just like the I-Pac does right here, and you hook up your JAMA harness to that J-Pac, and that's all you have to do. It's a little bit more user-friendly and easier, in my opinion, but I've never used one. I would actually, if I were you guys and interested in it, I would contact Adidas 1984X, I think it is. I hope you forgive me if I say that wrong. I don't have his screen name in front of me. I would get a hold of him or in contact with him, and if you need more info on the J-Pac, I think that's what he has in his machine, but I use the I-Pac because that's all I need. I don't need the JAMA harness or anything like that. But anyway, hopefully it helps out who needed to help out. And for those of you who just follow along with my videos, thanks for following along, and I guess we'll see you next time.